Welcome, Warriors. Patrick Gronbeck here, and today we're going to be covering the health topic of marijuana, more specifically, the harmful effects of marijuana. As always, please pay attention to what is in red, as it will be on your quiz tomorrow. To get started, we're going to watch a short video on is marijuana bad for your brain? After that, we'll start talking about some of the short and long-term effects, how it affects the teenage or developing brain, and we'll get into a couple other things. To end the presentation, we'll talk about some ways that you can say no.
In 1970, marijuana was classified as a Schedule I drug in the United States, the strictest designation possible, meaning it was completely illegal and had no recognized medical uses. For decades, this view persisted and set back research on the drug's mechanisms and effects. Today, marijuana's therapeutic benefits are widely acknowledged, and some nations have legalized medical use or are moving in that direction. But a growing recognition for marijuana's medical value doesn't answer the question, is recreational marijuana use bad for your brain? Marijuana acts on the body's cannabinoid system, which has receptors all over the brain and body. Molecules native to the body, called endocannabinoids, also act on these receptors. We don't totally understand the cannabinoid system, but it has one feature that provides a big clue to its function. Most neurotransmitters travel from one neuron to the next through a synapse to propagate a message. But endocannabinoids travel in the opposite direction. When a message passes from the one neuron to the next, the receiving neuron releases endocannabinoids. Those endocannabinoids travel backward to influence the sending neuron, essentially giving it feedback from the receiving neuron. This leads scientists to believe that the endocannabinoid system serves primarily to modulate other kinds of signals, amplifying some and diminishing others. Feedback from endocannabinoids slows down rates of neural signaling. That doesn't necessarily mean it slows down behavior or perception, though. For example, slowing down a signal that inhibits smell could actually make smells more intense. Marijuana contains two main active compounds, tetrahydrocannabinol, or THC, and cannabidiol, or CBD. THC is thought to be primarily responsible for marijuana's psychoactive effects on behavior, cognition, and perception, while CBD is responsible for the non-psychoactive effects. Like endocannabinoids, THC slows down signaling by binding to cannabinoid receptors. But it binds to receptors all over this sprawling, diffuse system at once, whereas endocannabinoids are released in a specific place in response to a specific stimulus. This widespread activity, coupled with the fact that the cannabinoid system indirectly affects many other systems, means that each person's particular brain chemistry, genetics, and previous life experience largely determine how they experience the drug. That's true much more so with marijuana than with other drugs that produce their effects through one or a few specific pathways. So the harmful effects, if any, vary considerably from person to person. And while we don't know exactly how marijuana produces specific harmful effects, there are clear risk factors that can increase people's likelihood of experiencing them. The clearest risk factor is age. In people younger than 25, cannabinoid receptors are more concentrated in the white matter than in people over 25. The white matter is involved in communication, learning, memory, and emotions. Frequent marijuana use can disrupt the development of white matter tracts and also affect the brain's ability to grow new connections. This may damage long-term learning ability and problem solving. For now, it's unclear how severe this damage can be, or whether it's reversible. And even among young people, the risk is higher the younger someone is. much higher for a 15-year-old than a 22-year-old, for instance. Marijuana can also cause hallucinations or paranoid delusions. Known as marijuana-induced psychosis, these symptoms usually subside when a person stops using marijuana. But in rare cases, psychosis doesn't subside, instead unmasking a persistent psychotic disorder. A family history of psychotic disorders, like schizophrenia, is the clearest, though not the only, risk factor for this effect. Marijuana-induced psychosis is also more common among young adults, though it's worth noting that psychotic disorders usually surface in this age range anyway. What's unclear in these cases is whether the psychotic disorder would have appeared without marijuana use, whether marijuana use triggers it early, is a catalyst for a tipping point that wouldn't have been crossed otherwise, or whether the reaction to marijuana is merely an indication of an underlying disorder. In all likelihood, marijuana's role varies from person to person. At any age, as with many other drugs, the brain and body become less sensitive to marijuana after repeated uses, meaning it takes more to achieve the same effects. Fortunately, unlike many other drugs, there's no risk of fatal overdose from marijuana, and even heavy use doesn't lead to debilitating or life-threatening withdrawal symptoms if use stops. There are more subtle forms of marijuana withdrawal, though, including sleep disturbances, irritability, and depressed mood, which pass within a few weeks of stopping use. So, is marijuana bad for your brain? It depends who you are. But while some risk factors are easy to identify, others aren't well understood, which means there's still some possibility of experiencing negative effects, even if you don't have any of the known risk factors.
Okay, that was another TED Ed videos. I really like to use those. They tend to be very complex, but they provide a lot of good information for us. As we continue along with our presentation today, all of the information that I'm using is from the Center of Disease Control or the National Institute of Drug Abuse. All right. So the first thing I want to go over is the short-term effects of marijuana. The most common short-term effects of using marijuana include attention, memory, and learning. When we talk about the long-term effects, it's kind of difficult to go into those. We have to consider that the legalization of marijuana in the United States only began within the last 10 years. Because marijuana was considered to be an illegal illicit drug, a class 1 drug, as I said in the beginning of the video, not much, especially long-term research, has been done on the effects of marijuana. It's important to remember that we don't know about many of these long-term effects. We also must consider this. This is a study done at the University of Mississippi on a variety of cannabis samples that were seized from the Drug Enforcement Agency. As you can see, in 1995, the cannabis that was seized, the THC levels in them was at 3.96%. In 2018, those levels jumped to 15.61%. What that means is marijuana now, or as of 2018, is nearly 4 times as potent as it was 25 years ago. So the research that we do have on these effects of marijuana has changed, now that it's 4 times stronger than it was in the past. What we do know that the effect of marijuana is much different on the developing brain. Unlike adults, the teen brain is actively developing and will not be fully developed until the mid-20s. Marijuana use during this period may harm the developing teen brain. Negative effects include difficulty thinking and problem solving, problems with memory and learning, impaired coordination, and also difficulty maintaining attention. These factors can lead to a variety of different things, before I get there. We know the short-term effects of marijuana include attention, memory, and learning. We know that marijuana use affects how the brain builds connections between these areas that are necessary for these brain functions. It is unclear how long these effects will last or whether the damage is permanent. Many factors must be considered, including the development of the brain during use, the amount and how often marijuana is used, the potency of the marijuana, and also other substances that are being used. As you can see, there's nothing highlighted in red here. The reason I didn't want to highlight anything, as they said, because of the lack of long-term studies and knowledge, we don't really have any true facts about this. Okay, here are a couple studies that have been done about marijuana in the teenage brain. Studies have shown that students that use marijuana are more likely to get lower grades and are more likely to drop out of school than their peers that do not use marijuana. Marijuana and mental health. Studies have shown marijuana use has been linked to a range of mental health problems in teens, such as anxiety, depression, and psychosis. I know psychosis was mentioned during the video. If you do not know what that is, it's a mental disorder characterized by a disconnection from reality. Studies have shown that the earlier someone begins to use marijuana, the more likely they are to experience these mental health issues. Marijuana also impacts you if you're an athlete, right? Due to the impact marijuana can have on coordination and reaction time, it also affects someone who uses marijuana's ability to play and perform sports at a high level. A couple other things I want you to consider when we're thinking about the topic of marijuana, and especially the harmful things of it, okay? Prior to the legalization of marijuana, again, which has happened in the last 10 years, it's happening at different rates across the country, all right? All sales of marijuana were done illegally. When marijuana is sold illegally, the seller is most interested in making money. The user is most concerned about the sensation from the drug or how they're going to feel from it. As we said in the video, all right, the more you use, the more your body is desensitized. You don't feel the effects of marijuana, all right? If you do not feel the effects of marijuana, it's less likely that you're going to purchase it, all right? So marijuana sold illegally sometimes can be laced with other drugs, so the users continue to feel that desired effect, so the seller continues to make money. Basically, the user doesn't actually know what they're putting in their body when they're purchasing it from someone without a license to sell it. Right? Marijuana, the gateway drug. All right? What that means is, does using marijuana, is it make them more likely to use other more illicit drugs? All right? Are marijuana users more likely to experiment with other drugs? After prolonged use, or after continued use of marijuana, the brain and body become less sensitive to the effects of marijuana, like I said earlier, which means you need more to feel the same effect. Or you need to use other drugs that have similar effects to marijuana, okay? Now, the studies on this are ongoing, but what they found is that typically that people use other drugs or abuse other drugs started with marijuana, all right? So even though their studies are kind of inconsistent, they don't have enough long-term research on whether marijuana is a gateway drug, right? They do know that people that use other drugs and abuse other drugs have started with marijuana. Here are some commonly asked questions about marijuana when I talked about this topic last year. Last year, I believe I was only able to cover it with 2 of the classes, so a little of this might be repeated if I was able to talk to some of you 7th graders, all right? Is marijuana illegal? It is legal to possess a certain amount of marijuana in the state of Illinois for adults 21 and older. All right, I did misspell marijuana there. However, it is still a crime to sell marijuana unless you have a state-approved license. Marijuana is still illegal at the federal level. I believe that there is a bill that was passed in the House that's going to be moving to the Senate, but as of right now, marijuana is still illegal at the federal level. It is illegal to operate a motor vehicle under the influence of marijuana, and it is illegal to use marijuana in public, whether that be in the state of Illinois or anywhere else. Second question, is marijuana addictive? 1 in 10 adult marijuana users will become addicted. 1 in 6 adolescents that use marijuana will become addicted. So that means if you begin using it at an earlier age, you're 4 times more likely to become addicted. Am I affected by marijuana if I am by someone that is using it? All right, these studies are directly, again, from the Center for Disease Control and the National Institute for Drug Abuse. Health concerns related to secondhand smoke are similar to those of cigarette smoke, okay? So the chemicals that you're going to inhale and how they affect your lungs and other parts of the body are similar to those of cigarette smoking. The effect of secondhand marijuana smoke, all right, the effect that it's going to have on you, whether you feel the same sensation, depends on a number of different factors, all right? Again, that's going to be how old you are, how developed your brain is, how close you are to it, how much of it is being smoked, things like that. Right? The last thing I want to talk about, all right, is very important. Just say no. All right? What we try to do here is we try to give you some information about it. We try and tell you why it's harmful for you. So when you get in that decision, so when you get in that opportunity where you're going to have to make that decision, you are educated. Okay? Now there's going to be a lot of different factors that contribute to it. All right? But here's a short little video on some refusal skills you can use when asked if you'd like to use marijuana.
Hello and welcome back to Prevention Connection. We're so happy that you're here with us today. We discussed risk and protective factors in our second video, and this week's video will tie into that topic. Today we'll be talking about refusal skills. Lack of refusal skills are considered a risk factor for substance use. It is important to note that refusal skills are something that anyone and everyone can learn and use. They provide individuals, particularly youth, with the ability to effectively say no to risky behavior like the consumption of alcohol and other drugs. We say the word no to a lot of things every day. Saying no to drugs and alcohol might seem like an easy thing to do, but for many, it is a lot more complicated than that. Peer pressure, social norms, and personal experience play a lot in our decisions. For many, the first time alcohol or drugs are offered can bring about a variety of emotions and feelings. Saying no might not seem so simple, especially if friends or family are involved. It's also important to know that there are many everyday situations in which someone can be offered drugs or alcohol. Before we dive into examples of refusal skills, we need to discuss reasons why individuals are willing to engage in substance use in the first place. Some of the reasons include to feel better, as an attempt to cope with stress, anxiety, depression, or other life circumstances. Attempting to fit in with friends or to groups that engage in drug and alcohol use. This can often be the result of peer pressure. To do better. One thing we often hear or say is, there is never enough time in the day. Some people turn to drugs as an effort to squeeze more time out of their day by staying awake longer to finish tasks like work or study for school. And lastly, to experiment. This can be simply because of something we read online or saw on television. We are curious by nature, and this can lead to experimentation. While these reasons above can seem appealing, the long-term consequences of substance abuse far outweigh the potential temporary benefits one might think they are achieving. Remember to set boundaries and have a plan. If you or someone you know are in this predicament and do not desire to engage in substance use, it is easier to respond if you have already made a plan. Here are some assertive refusal skills that may assist you. Give a reason. Identify consequences or show concern. Suggest an alternative. And lastly, act. We know situations like this can feel uncomfortable or even scary. Be sure to talk to someone you trust after so you can process your thoughts and your feelings. Thank you for joining us, and we hope this video has helped you feel.
Okay. All right, that is the last slide I have for you today. Again, my goal here was to inform you on how marijuana can affect your body and your brain, how it's even more harmful for you right now as a middle school student, a teenager, soon to be adolescent for some of you, and just some ways and some reasons of why to say no. If you do have any questions, feel free to ask us. Hopefully you paid attention to those things that were highlighted in red as they'll be on your quiz tomorrow. Have a good day.